we're going to kind of expand the topic beyond just the end of day icon and talk a little bit more about some of the other facets or functions that could be part of that nightly close process. The sales report menu. As far as end of day is concerned, the icon that's relevant is this one down here at the bottom where it says batch. When I click on batch, you see that column that opens up on the left-hand side. I can go and I can check boxes, turn them on and or turn them off. I want to print the ones that, you know what, I'm going to either want to keep with my paperwork so that when I come back to take a look at that at some point in time down the road, I can quickly see some summation numbers for the day, and or the reports that I'm going to walk in the morning, take a quick look at, and be able to not only assess some key performance indicators, but also determine if there's anything I need to go back and review from the previous day. You'll notice when I clicked on batch, I've got 3 reports that are turned on in my end of day. Now again, everybody's a little different. You can print as many and or as few as you like, but some variation of these are what I find to be most relevant, at least as we start out with an end of day process. I say some variation because if you look at the first 2, the summary report and the shop performance report, those reports are redundant in a number of different ways. Meaning if we print the summary report, we'll find that it's going to give us numbers like total sales, gross margin and gross profit, number of repair orders, average per invoice, and a breakdown of how each one was paid. If we ran a shop performance report, we'll find those same numbers, but there are some nuances or differences one versus the other. So it wouldn't necessarily be awful to print them both. But again, that's going to give us the detail of, hey, here's kind of how we did for the day. The other one I've got flagged is an RO profit report. Whenever anybody asks me, well, why do you have that as part of your end of day process? My justification is, well, one of the things I'm going to do is I look at that summary report or that shop performance report is I'm going to look at where my margin fell yesterday. I have an expectation of here's where my parts margin, if I'm using a labor cost, here's where my labor margin is going to be to target for any given day. There will be days where I don't achieve that target. I'd like to be able to quickly identify what was the deficiency, which invoices do I need to go back and review to determine, well, why didn't I achieve my margin? Maybe it turns out that I sold 4 sets of tires that day. Tires, obviously, high dollar, low margin. So therefore, it brought my overall parts margin down below my target level. And in that instance, well, that's okay. It's very easy for me to identify those anomalies or the ones that probably need to be looked at through my RO profit report. And really, as it relates to end of day, I want to make it easy for whomever is closing the shop that day. So I'm going to set up my batch. All I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to hit batch. I'm going to tell it, you know what? I'd also like to print out for my bookkeeper my payments ledger detail and then click on save. And from that point forward, all the shop needs to do is just click on batch, click on print, and then tell it to spool them to the printer. And now I get my paper coming off. So again, they don't have to know to print this report, that report, this report, that report. They just know that, hey, here's the batch that I've got set up. This batch is configured on each terminal individually. So find the computer you're going to use to do your end of day, and then go ahead and set your batch up there and then hit save. I'm going to close back out of here, get back to my core point of sale. There are a couple of other things that I want to talk about or at least mention. First one is what we call central office. For multi-shop locations primarily, central office is a way that we can essentially replicate the data from one location to another, meaning I've got 5 stores and I've got a bookkeeper, maybe it's an inventory control specialist, maybe it's just me that's in some other offsite location, whether it's an office, whether it's my house, but I've got a computer where I'd like to be able to run reports to configuration changes for all 5 of my shops. That's what central office would do. So if I was using central office, part of my end of day routine might be to come out and click on transit. Now I don't have it set up and configured. Not really anything to see other than just it thinks for a while and then comes back and gives me a transmission complete message. But certainly if central office is part of your solution, then running that during end of day might potentially be included in your routine. Now, ideally, we can also set that up using a scheduled task inside of Windows. So if my shop closes up and they forget to send end of day, Windows can wake up and send it for me as well. But never a bad thing to have 2 different opportunities as opposed to relying on just one and or the other. So again, sending central office, essentially part of that end of day routine as well. As we finish up the conversation, Gen 2 allows you to set a schedule and to back up your data. In fact, as we do the migration or the installation, it gets set as part of the install/upgrade process. However, there are some options available there. Not only can I set the time, but also I can set a secondary location, because the backup does get set automatically to a backup location that's driven by Microsoft SQL Server. That backup location is on the same hard drive where that data exists to begin with. So there is an animal called Server Utilities. I'm going to bring up my AutoWriter Server Utilities window. Now, if you go to Start and either Programs, AutoWriter, you'll find Server Utilities there. The other way to find it on Windows 10 is if you click on Start and then just in the search option, go ahead and just type in the word server and you'll find Server Utilities. It'll bring us into this window here where the database name is almost invariably going to be AutoWriter. And as I click on Next, there's a couple of different pieces inside of my Server Utilities menu. The one that's relevant to today's conversation is this section about database backup. Now, backup now would say, let me just go ahead and back up my database right now. For whatever reason, I want to do a backup at this particular moment in time. If you notice, the second option says schedule backup, which I've got it running at 1:05 p.m. Not probably the best idea. That's right in the middle of a business day. Probably running it sometime after the store has been closed would be the more appropriate setting. But so again, set your time and then schedule the backup. And the other piece would be a backup copy. You notice, again, I'm going to save it to C:\RO_tool. Probably not the best idea, because again, we're saving it to that exact same hard drive where the data already exists. If this hard drive crashed, well, not only is the primary database potentially going, but also my backup. So certainly we'd recommend that you set this to a path other than the local computer. Now, any network path will do. So again, if I've got another computer that's shared and I want to go ahead and map a drive to it, or just use the network path name, I can get there as long as I can browse there through Windows. If you want to host your own FTP server and post them there, we give you the opportunity to do that as well. I don't know many folks that are doing that, but it is an available option if you so chose. So again, notice on my backup, it says we're going to not only back up the database, but we're going to make an additional copy to the path below of C:\RO tool. Whenever I talk about backups, my typical question would be, do you know where your backups are going? And if your answer to that question is, well, no, I'm not sure, then I'd recommend that you find out. That data is an asset, and we want to make sure that we're protecting and maintaining that asset. One last piece as far as backups are concerned, there is another backup routine that's inside of the program. If you went down into your system tray, what you'll find is we've got this little animal called the RO tray server. This has a couple of different purposes. What you'll notice is that first icon there that says support utilities has an option for a file backup/restore. The difference between the two backups is the one that runs in Server Utilities, that runs on that schedule, we're going to back up your data. That is the most important element if we needed to move our writer onto another computer for whatever reason. This is an additional backup that essentially backs up everything our writer related. So not only your registry settings, but if you're doing custom marketing letters, again, anything that's our writer related. It's not a bad idea to come in here and run this backup on whatever frequency you see fit. I don't know that it's necessary to do it every day, although if you're storing a bunch of images in the references tab and you want to make sure they get backed up, again, this will do that for you. And then the question that often comes from that is, well, I did that backup, where did it go? So if we jump into Windows Explorer for a second and we go underneath the AutoWriter data folder, and then in there is a backup folder. And you'll notice there is that backup. So if I wanted to move that onto an external media, that's where I would go find that backup. So again, Gen 2, that backup gets run automatically. So end of day, not kicking that off. However, again, a very relevant piece of the conversation as far as Gen 2 and end of day is concerned.